A big thanks to Movaglobes for sponsoring today's video. More on that in a minute.
Yeah.
You'd think at least they could just put in some freaking speed bumps. Just put in 25 mile an hour.
You can put in some speed bumps. You can put in some temporary traffic lights to be able to control that.
No, but
you've got police cars that
flash
and do stuff like that. I mean, there's everything else. And if people are still getting accidents, then those are bad drivers. Okay. Or you're doing something wrong that is confusing a lot of drivers. But more than likely this was, and I guarantee you, the problem is not the launch goers. I bet a lot of it is people getting confused trying to get to the cruise ship, because that's where all the parking and everything else is around there, and they're trying to get there. And,
well,
and like, oh my God, it's taking, the horn just went off. It's an hour away, Mabel. We got to hurry up.
Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Guess who I am with again? It is Dr. Scott Walter, who you just heard ranting about some Space Force stuff. They've decided to shut down a major viewing area. By the way, if you want this, got the merch here, got 2 weeks to orbit, which would actually maybe happen if it weren't for the National Fish and Wildlife Service. So we can rant about them too if we want. But today we are here to talk about Falcon Heavy launch, about the center core versus the side cores, and about how Starship will change the game. So welcome, Scott. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that full rant will be posted. That was just supposed to be a preview for John for some edits, but evidently
I will put that on X. How's that? It seems like
it's not the best read through of them all, but yeah, I mean, it's disappointing,
right, that
the U.S. Space Force, I guess, can only control satellites in orbit.
So give us the super brief, like, nutshell version of what is going on. So they're closing down one of the best rockets.
There's one of the best viewing points in all of the Cape Canaveral area for launches. This is a place called Rocket View Point, which is right next to the south gate of the Space Force entrance. And the Space Force usually goes out there and they do a little bit of crowd control to make sure people are safely to get over to the parking area, to the viewing and everything else. And they decided to close it down because of a couple of incidents, and which may or may not even be related to launches. It's not clear because the press release was so vague in the way they used it. My suspicion is it's more of an excuse than a reason to shut that down. And that, because the cadence of launches is so much, they just can't handle the fact that people want to come over and watch rocket launches. It's one of the best viewing points, and they've just decided to shut it down. And I think it just, if they can't manage light crowds, how can they manage satellites in space? Really, it's not rocket science. Take care of it. So you can read my rant on X about this.
There you go. I'll post a link to that down below. So today, on more positive end of things, speaking of launch cadence, we had the 16 Psyche mission with the Falcon Heavy launch of the rocket. Awesome news and everything. The sad part about it is that it's sometime in 2029. I don't know exactly what month, but that's when it will actually arrive, due to the fact that it has to go around and around and around and around the sun, get some gravity assist and all sorts of other things. So we're going to talk about all that.
Takes 6 years to get there. Yep.
Yes. So it's pretty crazy.
But the other thing, talking about launch cadence, is like that morning you had like a perfect viewing point from Rocket View Point. That nice view of the Falcon Heavy comes right over your head. You hear the roar of everything. You see the stage separation, everything. You see the boosters come down, and it's as good as anywhere else because you're so close. And when you hear the bang of the sonic boom, the water literally jumps and everything else, and you feel like you get hit right there. And that's what the Space Force is taking away from the public. The next time something like that happens, you won't be able to do it. And then, of course, less than 9 hours later, there was another launch out of there.
Right.
So that's the first time. That's the closest since 1966 that we had 2 launches like that.
Really?
And
the days of Gemini. Was it 2 Gemini?
Yeah, Days of Gemini with Gemini and the Agena target vehicle. So they launched those both really close to be able to do that. And this is just amazing that you're able to see something like that. And that's sort of the second time it's happened. The last time was in August. We had one within the same. It was still the same calendar day, but they were both morning night launches. One was 3 a.m. Crew 7, and the other one was a Starlink one around 9 o'clock. And that was like 18 hours apart. This was like less than 9 hours. So they cut that in half. Right. And they were both, I think, maybe considered daytime launches. One of them was like right at sunset, the second one. So that's just remarkable. And and that was Friday the 13th. So think how lucky a day that was. If you were there on Friday the 13th, you get to see 2 launches that close. a Heavy on top of that, not just like 2 Falcon 9s, but a Heavy and a Falcon 9.
More on that in a minute, but first, I bet you've been staring over my shoulder at this amazing globe behind me the entire video. Well, that, my friends, is a MOVA globe, and it's not only a work of art, but a work of science as well. As you probably know, I'm a huge map and astronomy nerd, so as soon as I saw MOVA globes online, I was hooked, and they're even more amazing in person. Whether you pick a map of the Earth, Jupiter, Mars, which Elon Musk has, or the Earth with Clouds globe that I got, the Earth doesn't just sit there, it actually rotates under ambient light. Isn't that magical? And the science behind it is amazing too. MOVA globes use solar cells, magnets, and the Earth's magnetic field itself to make the globe rotate as you watch it, no batteries or wires needed. Even knowing how it works, it's almost magic watching it slowly rotate around its axis. It's mesmerizing. Be sure to click my link in the description to get 10% off your MOVA globe. And they come in 3 sizes, 4.5 inches, 6 inches like this one, and a whopping 8.5 inches to fit any need. There are over 40 designs to choose from, including space with images from NASA, maps, and even famous artworks. MOVA globes are fantastic gifts, either for a loved one or to give to yourself. Thanks again to MOVA globes for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to click my link in the description to get 10% off your MOVA globe, and join me and Elon in having these amazing movable works of art. And now let's get back to it. Kudos. It's pretty, I've been watching Homemade Documentaries, has done a whole really good series on the Apollo missions and the Gemini missions and everything. And I think it's pronounced Gemini. That's what they seem to say back in those days. But anyway, the fact that, like, the amount of work that goes in at the ground crew and getting ready to launch a vehicle is just astounding. And the fact that SpaceX is just turning these things around sometimes twice in a day is kind of mind-blowing that they can do that.
Yeah, it is. It is. And they're also doing the same thing over at Vandenberg. So sometimes you'll get like 3 launches within 36 hours because they're also going out of Vandenberg. Right. So they have all these different launch crews that are skilled and practiced. You know, practice makes perfect. And this is one of the advantages I think SpaceX has. It's like everyone knows what's going on. They can just keep on rotating crews. I just wonder how many they have. I mean, clearly they got kind of 3 that they're running at the same time. But I wouldn't be surprised if they technically have 4 or 5 launch crews that they can have that they're rotating in or out. And that's a lot of experience. It's really easy to like move people around. So, you know, you never have a rookie crew. You always have a lot of experience. So yeah, that goes. And I think you're right. I think the spacecraft is Gemini, and the constellation is Gemini. Right. Just like you know, it's like the Bolt is manufactured in Orion Township, not Orion, even though they're spelled the same. So yeah, you get different pronunciations. So the constellations have one pronunciation, and the stuff down here on Earth, I guess, is something different.
I've always called it Gemini, but it every historical document that I see, when I hear people talk about it, they always say Gemini. So I'm like, I'm going with that. Yeah. I'll go with the historical pronunciation of it. So yeah. So anyway, just fantastic stuff. And it is, you know, your rant is warranted in the sense that this is a point of pride for the US. The fact that we're launching 80% of the mass of all things going to orbit this year are coming from the United States in the form of SpaceX. But you know, it's really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there are plenty of viewing around in the Cape area. And, you know, it takes a while to find the one that is like, you know, the best one, and then to see them shut it down, just like, no, they should. I mean, you need to have more public access. It's like, what's the Space Force for? Nobody knows what the Space Force is for. It's like suddenly I thought the Air Force is in charge of a lot of that stuff. Why do we suddenly need to have the Space Force? So they are doing a really poor job of public relations, and I think this hurts them. And the thing is, all they did was a little bit of crowd control. They could have taken other opportunities, like say, hey, we're the Space Force. This is what we do. You know, it's like, you want to find out that, you know, they could put up some TV screens or something like that, explaining what the Space Force is. And if you're interested in being, I think, a guardian or something like that, you know, here's your opportunity. Oh, we've got a recruiting officer over here. If you know, your parents that are here with your teenage sons and they're not quite sure, they're looking at the opportunity. Golden opportunity, missed opportunity. And now, I don't know. I think it's a little bit of an own goal there, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of, I don't know about other people, but it seems like Space Force is kind of a joke. Like it's like what it's like it's almost like it's like a TV show or something. It's like, come on, this isn't real. And the best way to make themselves seem real is to associate themselves with these launches. And every time people, you're absolutely right. Have recruiters there. I mean, just have people who are information people just saying like, yeah, this is
and if you can't figure out how to do something with the traffic, just call like the local police force in Port Canaveral. I'm sure they're competent enough to be able to do it.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So anyway, let's turn to this Falcon launch. I'm going to share the screen right here and get this guy.
Yeah. Now this kind of caused a tweet. Yes, we go. And so I tweeted a little bit about this the other day because I noticed something really nice about this launch.
So this is a nice slow-mo. This is provided by SpaceX. So thanks, SpaceX. That's awesome. And of course, I'll leave a link to this in the description. But here it's about to hit kind of a light cloud deck, and that will give us a really nice view of the center core.
Right. So if you look at it right now, all the cores are full thrust. You can kind of tell from the plumes. And then right around there, and I'm not sure if you can normally see this, the cloud deck helps you see right there that the center core is not thrusting as much as the two side boosters. And now this is much better than the NASA feed. This is like a really good clip that they had. The NASA feed, it didn't look as good. It was too washed out. But right here, it seems like the clouds do something. They act like a nice filter to make it very easy to see. Now, this is, I think, about 50% speed. So even though it's at like the 24, 25 second mark, I think it's around 12 seconds.
Right.
And you really see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'll stop it here this next time around as it gets to the point where, as it clears the tower, you can definitely, I mean, just look at the bottom of where all the flames are.
Yes.
And it's pretty easy to tell that all of them are equal. So
yes,
at this point, they're all the same, all three. Really nice view, by the way. So you can see all three really well. All three still the same. Then as we get up to the 20-something second mark, right about there.
Now
you can see that center core starting to throttle back down.
Yes.
So yeah. And
absolutely.
Oh, it's so pretty. Wow, that's just beautiful. Yeah. So we can switch over to this, who is a post from Dr. Robert Rode. I think from all the way back in 2018.
Yes.
So, but this is a February 8th, 2018. So right after the first launch, but this is a really, really nice graph of the Falcon Heavy launch, the original one. And it's really interesting here how you can see they're at 1.5 Gs. So 10 Gs or 10 meters per second squared approximately is 1 G. So that's just overcoming Earth's gravity. So if you don't have thrust higher than that, you're not going anywhere. you can, it's just a propane tank in that case, just blasting. So clearly they start off at right around 1.5 Gs or 15 meters per second squared. And then at about the 30-second mark, which is it's actually where we were about 12. So we were before the max Q throttle bucket at that point. But you can see right here, probably at that 12-second mark right there is that original drop off.
Yes.
Cuts. And then as the fuel, so the reason why the acceleration profile is going up and not staying flat is because the propellant, the RP1 and oxygen are being exhausted. And so the rocket is getting lighter and lighter.
It's all about thrust to weight. So the thrust is constant, but the weight is changing really rapidly. Right. And when you look at those curves, you're seeing what is a classic exponential function there.
Right.
Because even though you're consuming the same amount of fuel the whole time to produce the same amount of thrust, the fractions to the overall mass decrease faster and faster. So you might be consuming at the same rate. And at one point, like say over a 10-second span, you may have decreased the mass by 5%. But then over the next 10%, you may have decreased it by 10%. And then the next one, so it'll kind of continue. And it really cascades and goes a lot faster as you're starting to go up. So so you can see a lot there.
Let's just walk through this real quick for everyone's edification. If they might not know. So anyway, launch 1.5 Gs, 15 meters per second squared, goes up. Center core starts to throttle down. So you get a little throttle bucket, but then you're using up propellant. So it starts going back up again.
Yes.
Then we get to max Q, which is the maximum aerodynamic pressure. It's moving quickly. It's still low in the atmosphere. So it has to throttle down even more to just not blast through that really, really heavy atmosphere at that point. So you can see it drops down to maybe 13 meters per second squared, somewhere around there.
Yep.
And then it starts to come back up again. I believe.
And it comes up just because you're consuming propellant mass. That's not throttling up.
Exactly.
And then you see the throttle up right after, like 1
and
minute.
then, yeah, at the 1 minute mark, just about 1 minute, we pass through max Q, and then you can see throttle up. It immediately goes to about 18 meters per second squared,
Yep.
or, close to 2 Gs. And then it gets, it goes up very, very rapidly until the two side cores, stop. And
Yep.
at that point, we're at about almost 3.5 Gs, 3.2 Gs, something like that up here, right? So
Yes. Yes.
and then the side boosters cut off, and it drops all the way down to 1.5 Gs because we've only got one booster burning anymore. But very, very rapidly so I think the center core
that's the booster separation. So what happens is that you have the booster cut off. So the booster engines have to cut off before they can separate.
Right.
And a little bit before that, because if you go right around where it crosses 30, you'll notice it goes up really steep. Right at that point, the center core starts to go back up to maximum thrust. So that's why you get a little bit more of it going up at that point in anticipation of those boosters cutting off. As soon as they cut off, suddenly you've lost 2/3 of your thrust, but you still have the same mass.
Right.
And that's why you have this precipitous drop that suddenly it's like, oh, I get the same mass.
Right.
But then you eject the boosters.
Right.
And when you eject the boosters, suddenly it's like, whoa, all of a sudden our mass ratio has changed rapidly. Yes. Right. And that's why, that's not even throttle up there.
I think, it's a combination of two, but anyway.
That there is actually the booster being dropped. That's the only way you could get something so precipitous like that. So a drop like that and going up is like, whoop, they come back on there. And now you don't have the original thrust, but now you're starting to get back on up there as you can start to consume the repellent and you go down. But the one thing we want to point out about this,
the difference between the side boosters cutting off and the center core is only about 45 seconds. I mean, you look at this, it's like somewhere around 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And by the 3 minute mark, the center core is cut off too. So it's a very small amount of time, but because it's such high Gs, you're getting a lot of extra.
Right. But the thing is this is the first Falcon Heavy. The profile for Psyche is a little bit different. So the first thing to remember about this is that this was done collecting the telemetry data from the telecast, which is really hard to do. Okay.
Right.
It's painstaking to do it. And there's a lot of data artifacts in there. So when you look over around between 7 and 8 minutes, you get those wiggles in there. Yeah. A lot of times that's because there's like a data dropout going in there. So it really is smooth. And I know this because I did this myself a couple of times, and it's really hard to get it right. So the first thing here is like max Q is actually not at 1 minute. It's usually around 75 seconds. So it's actually kind of past that when you get the max Q. So that's a little bit off there. The BECO, or the booster engine cutoff, happens at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, which is the exact same time that MECO happens for a Falcon 9.
Right.
So both of them are basically going on the same profile. However, in this case, and part of it might be because the central booster is not recovered, it went all the way to 4 minutes. You get another 90 seconds out of the Psyche launch.
Okay, right. Because this profile is different because they were trying to recover the center core, and it was an experiment. It was an experimental flight. They didn't have a lot of mass on the flight, so they didn't.
Right. And they so and at that point, I think they didn't have like the Block 9, so they were not as efficient rockets at that time. Actually, I think they were almost like a generation behind because the Falcon Heavy was trying to design what was sort of an older block, and they had the newer blocks coming out, and they weren't sure, we're going to use it. And then finally they got it. So you have the same boosters. And as a matter of fact, a lot of those boosters had been pre-flown already. As we could see, they were charred all over. So the reason that you have that 10 seconds, the throttle down, is to conserve as much propellant mass as you can for later. Because think about it. The second stage doesn't light up until 4 minutes. Normally it lights up at 2.5 minutes. So you're getting another 90 seconds. Yeah. And those 90 seconds are way more performative than the 90 seconds before that. Because you're so light, your thrust to weight ratio was so good.
And you're out of the atmosphere.
You're out of the atmosphere. You are really accelerating. So the delta V you're getting in right there is just incredible. So at that point, the second stage almost doesn't have to do anything to be able to continue the mission. So that's kind of what's going on. And then of course the whole reason of doing that is that if you can't tell from the slow motion, if you go to the actual NASA feed where they show that thing, that Falcon Heavy it jumps off the pad.
Oh yeah.
It clears the tower probably a second sooner than you're normally used to seeing for a Falcon 9. So it's really going on up there.
And also the Falcon, I mean, I think people are used to like the Saturn V watching that clear the tower. That I believe had a 1.1 thrust to weight ratio at start. The Falcons are 1.5 plus. So they're really hopping off there. They get out of there fast.
This thing goes. And so it's got so much thrust. It's like, we got to throttle back anyways, because there's just too much. Because the thing is, if ideally you would like to burn all your fuel as quickly as possible, in an ideal sense. In an ideal sense means
like a cannonball,
a planet with no atmosphere.
Right.
As soon as you have atmosphere, everything kind of changes. Suddenly you have to optimize for something different. So the reason why you want to burn everything as quickly as possible is this thing called gravity losses. Is a lot of the propellant you're burning has nothing to do with lifting the payload. It has more than 90% of it that you're burning is to lift the propellant.
In this graph, just if you look at the Earth's gravity, that thick black line, everything below that is just subtracted. That doesn't do you anything. It does nothing. And the fact that
you're using propellant to lift propellant.
Exactly.
And that's why if you could burn it all at one instant, right at launch, that would be great. Then all the energy would go into it, but that's called an explosion. Okay. And the other thing, even if you did that, you would then have to deal with the fact that you have drag, that suddenly your projectile is going to be slowed down, not just because of gravity, but more likely because of the drag forces going up. So since the lower part of the atmosphere is the thickest part, you may as well go kind of slow there and then slowly build up. And then the other thing is you want to minimize max Q. So max Q could happen anywhere. And max Q is a relationship between the density of air and the speed of the vehicle. So drag is density times velocity squared. If you double velocity, your drag goes up 4 times. So that's really bad. So now if you can make the density go down faster than V squared is going up, then you can kind of minimize a bit of the drag. So there's this optimization going on of where in the atmosphere is the best place to get that max Q. If you start accelerating too quickly, your max Q is going to happen lower in the atmosphere, which means the drag is going to be really bad. So it's figuring out the balance between drag losses and energy losses. And of course, the fact that you don't want to have too much stress on the vehicle, trying to optimize all those things to come up with that particular profile. So it makes sense from that standpoint. The other, of course, we don't want to have them all burning at the same time, because I think, as you pointed out, if they all burn at the same time, then the booster separation and the main engines are all going to cut off at the same time, and you don't want that. You want it. You literally want to never stop thrusting, so you don't get that gravity loss.
Elon said. Elon said.
Right. Because, so you don't get the gravity loss when you shut down for a little bit. You get a little bit of a gravity loss, as you can see here at the 3-minute mark. That's a gravity loss right there, because
and actually we still haven't gotten through the whole profile, because I think this is fascinating too. And again, this is the original launch, so it's going to be conservative specs. But when the center engine cuts out, you get to 0 Gs for a second, because of course there's no thrust. Then the second stage kicks in, which goes up to here. But that actually at the beginning is less than 1 G, which means that it's falling back towards the Earth. And I mean, I know it's going up, but anyway, it's not accelerating fast enough to compensate for, somewhere around 45 seconds until it gets back to that. But of course, by then it's going very sideways. So most of what it's doing.
The other thing we got to be careful of is this is data that's being grabbed from the telecast.
Yes, absolutely.
And the telecast, it's hard because at that point we don't really have the pitch angle.
Right.
And
that's what I'm saying.
And the velocity, everything. So it's a little bit tricky to be able to tell, to figure out what it is. But it's hard to believe that they would go almost a minute below Earth's gravity unless they were intentionally wanting to come down. Because you've got the horizontal, at that point, you're going pretty much horizontal. So you're accelerating a lot that way. And you just need to make sure you have enough to kind of fight gravity. But that should be coming from the vehicle velocity. So I'm a little bit suspicious that it should be a little bit higher, but it does give you the kind of the character of what's going on and what it's going to look like.
Yeah. And but like I said, at this point, you got to remember, actually, you watch that. If you watch launch profiles, oftentimes it goes up to like 100 miles, 160 kilometers or something. And then you'll see it start to drop off again, because what it's doing is it's flipping sideways. It's getting to orbit is not about getting as high as you can. It's about going sideways.
As fast as you can. So in some ways, they're almost intentionally falling down, picking
Right.
up speed that way
Right.
as well as doing the other.
If you think about like a fighter jet or something, and this is not a good equivalent because that has air under its wings, but if you want to go extra fast, you point it downward and you can accelerate really fast because you get your thrust plus you get the gravitational assist. So they can kind of boost themselves and then scoop back up again. So yeah, it's all about getting to what is it, 25,000 kilometers an hour, 17,500,
Yes.
somewhere around that amount to get into orbit. So
yeah, exactly, around there. So the center stage does power down, but I think it can only power down to about 40%, which may be what it's doing, which is why they're able to get that extra 90 seconds out of there, which is just amazing that you're able to do that. And so you can just imagine with the normal launch, second stage takes over 2.5 minutes versus 3 minutes or 4 minutes is going to make a big difference.
Right. Yeah, you're looking at somewhere around here too. And like you said, it's more like 4 minutes in a current launch profile. So there's a big difference in the amount of time that a person will be the rocket is going to be thrusting with that extra stage, which is the whole, plus the fact you can lift heavier stuff because on launch, you can get more thrust. You can put a much heavier payload in the top fairing than you can with Falcon 9 because you just have more thrust at takeoff. So the combination of those two things is really
right. And I think I think it's around 40,000 kilometers per second is escape velocity, if I recall correctly. Versus 25,000 to get into Leo. So then the delta V would have to be another 15 on top of that. So in order to make it out to Psyche, you're going to need to go from 25 to 40. Yeah. So normally when the Starlink satellites are going up there, we're just going up to 25.
Per hour. You said per second. I was like, whoa, that's really.
Oh yeah, sorry, per kilometers per hour.
I was like, that's a good fraction of the speed of light at 40,000 per second. Yeah,
see, it's because you forced me to go into metric units there. I get all confused, kilometers.
I try to stay, miles per hour would be fine. Metric. I try to stay in metric.
Yep.
Anyway, so that is really amazing. And by the way, the 16 Psyche mission is going to be incredible. But first of all, they got delayed because there was a software problem last year, right? So then it's a much longer mission. I think they ended up adding an extra like 18 months or something after the takeoff because it's not aligned as well as it was a year ago.
Okay.
But why does it have to take so long? Well, actually, you should turn around and show people your T-shirt because that's not actually the right T-shirt, but it has something to do with that kind of thing. So that's the home and transfer orbit. But this is why, this is what we would like to go for. What we end up with instead, because it's in the asteroid belt outside of the orbit of Mars, is it goes around the sun. It comes back around to Venus or Earth first. I don't recall exactly. But anyway, it gets a gravity boost from one of those planets, goes back around again, gets another gravity boost, gets around, So it takes like a year every time it goes around the sun to get back again. And then it
basically is the thing, like a swing set is that you gave it the initial boost, it's swinging, but you want a little bit higher. So you wait for it to come around, you give it a little bit more of a push, and then give it another one. It'll get finally high enough that it can get all the way out there.
Right.
So the Hohmann transfer is basically an elliptical orbit. Right. So an elliptical orbit is easier to get into than a circular orbit. Right. So to go from the Earth to Mars, we time this elliptical orbit to be such that the perihelion is Earth and the apohelion is out by Mars.
Yeah.
So it basically goes on up that. And in order to do it, I mean, it's a really simple kind of calculation. Is first of all, you got to get the timing right. And the way I look at it is it's sort of like a quarterback in a wide receiver. As a wide receiver is going in motion behind the quarterback, and then the quarterback throws the ball to where the wide receiver will be, not where the wide receiver is. Right. So what ends up happening with the Hohmann transfer is that we're launching it to where Mars is going to be at some point in the future. And it's going to be about 9 months out. So if you kind of work everything out, Earth has obviously an orbit of 1 year.
Right.
And Mars is almost 2 years. I think it's like 25 months or something like that.
It's
so if you go into an elliptical
26.
orbit that goes between Earth and Mars,
right.
Basically you take kind of the average between them. So it's like, not 1 year, not 2 years. What's that? The half, a year and a half. So it's about 18 months. So
no, I think it's actually 26. I think 26 is the window.
It's 26 months, but I always keep in my head it's about 2 years. So I think it's it's 26 months, but say roughly 2 years. So the idea is it's about 9 months to be able to do the uphill climb to then come back down to complete your orbit. So that's why it takes about 9 months, because it's a very easy trajectory that requires the least amount of energy to get there.
Right.
You can get there sooner but it requires a lot more propellant. The other thing you got to watch out for is, like, every wide receiver will know this. You get some quarterbacks when they throw the ball, it's a nice soft ball, very easy to catch. Right. And others that throw it so hard, it hits your hands and stings out. The same thing can happen. If you come in too hot to Mars, you are just going to blast right on by. Right. You're not going to slow down. So you want to kind of
so
get
you have to be
there.
like right at the
and then you can go in there, and you still need to do a little bit of a retro in there, but it's not as much if you're coming in really hot.
Right.
And so you're going to need a burn to be able to get yourself into the orbit, or you end up going into the atmosphere, dipping in the atmosphere to use aero braking or something like that. And either way, you need to do something to be able to catch that football when it gets to Mars.
Right. The same thing happens with lunar. If you're taking a moon rocket, and weirdly enough, the amount of extra propellant to get from the Earth to Mars is not that much more than to get from the Earth to the moon. If you're going to land on the moon, especially because you don't get aero braking for free. You get a lot of reduction of velocity on Mars for free. But anyway, the same thing happens if the Apollo missions, they took off, went around the Earth, they fired the rockets on the backside of the Earth. That then caused an elliptical orbit, which took them up high enough that they crossed into the zone where there was more gravitational pull from the moon than from the Earth, which is pretty close to the moon because it's small. And then they fell. You can think about it as going up a hill and down a hill, but basically they get to the top and then they switch to another hill and they fall down that hill instead. And that's and it's same for Mars.
If you look at the orbit, it's kind of like a figure 8 orbit that they do. It's a free return kind of orbit.
Yeah.
And the idea is that they don't come from behind the moon. They kind of actually come in front of it. Right. So we talk about the flyby. If you're doing a flyby and you come from behind an object in space, that's where you'll get a gravitational boost because it will kind of pull you along. But if you come in the other way, in an intense, it will kind of drag you and slow you down a little bit, not enough to capture you.
Right.
But what that means is like a little less delta V to be able to slow down. So that's why they came around in front of the moon as the moon would orbit by. And so I don't know if they're doing the same thing with Mars. It's a little bit trickier because it's much further out. But you're right. Once you get out of the Earth's gravitational well, which you need to do to get to the moon, it's not that much more to make it out to just about any planet. It's just you have to be really patient. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, it is really interesting that one of the reasons they did that trajectory also was because they were losing delta V, but it was a free return trajectory. So if the rocket failed, which it kind of did with Apollo 13, the spacecraft continues around the moon, whips around the backside, and goes right back to Earth. So you don't, it requires course corrections to make sure you hit the Earth at the right time in the right place, but you kind of get a freebie. So
yes,
that's not
free return if the main engine is out. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Which turned out to be a really wise decision for Apollo 13. Yeah. And I think there have also been a lot of mission profiles to Mars that are sort of the same idea of a free return. A few years ago, and remember there was going to be, it was going to happen like 2018 or something like that. There was going to be an unnamed couple that was going to go like on a Dragon space. That was going to actually supposed to go all the way to Mars. I mean, they were talking about something like that, and it would be a 2-year mission, and it would be a complete free return. So they would get very close to Mars. They'd fly around Mars, and it would give them the return to come back to Earth with very little course correction required. I'm not, but then of course lots of things change and everything else.
Life support for 2 years in a Dragon capsule would not be a joke.
It's
not a very large capsule. But let's talk about that. So the Psyche mission, many Mars missions, a lot of outer planet missions, many of them, and also interplanet like Mercury and the sun and stuff. You have to do it backwards. You have to keep slowing down and slowing down and slowing down. So you do the opposite, but you have to come all the way around the sun, and then you have to get a kick from Venus or Earth usually. That then kicks you out to a higher elliptical orbit. You come back to the same place, you get another kick. And this is why we're talking about 6 years to get out to Psyche. Right. With the Starship, the difference is that the Starship, I don't know what the Falcon Heavy's max payload is, but is it 8 tons, something like that, metric tons, or 10? It's an order of magnitude less than Starship.
Yeah, as far as going out to Mars, because I think it's more than that.
Yeah. I'm just talking about like what it can lift to GTO or something like that, and then you can kickstage it. But the big thing is that if you think about a Starship, not only is it way bigger, but it can take about 10 times-ish more weight up to LEO, up to low Earth orbit, than the Falcon Heavy can. And what that means is you can still have your 8-ton spacecraft that you want to send to Psyche or Jupiter or whatever it is, but you can also then have a 90-ton rocket inside the rocket, right? Another like basically a liquid fueled kick stage or even a solid fuel one. You open up the fairing, you spit it out, and that thing just blasts. And you can get, I mean, once you're in orbit and once you break out of that escape velocity, 40,000 kilometers an hour ish or something, not per second. Anyway, but once you hit that acceleration, you can go straight to these other ones instead of having to do this woo, 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 around and around and around, the planets we go.
John, that's never going to happen. I'll tell you why.
Why?
Are you familiar with Boyle's law of computing?
Which
the software always expands to fit the size of the RAM.
I see what you're going to say.
I have a feeling that the payload always expands to fit the size of the fairing.
Right.
So it's like, well, wait a minute, we could send like a much larger thing out there. And the other thing you got to remember about these programs is basically they're like a job for life kind of thing.
Right.
And if you speed it up, he's like, what do you mean the program is going to be over in 2 years? I got kids to feed and tuition to pay and everything else. So like every one of them, you design these things to make sure it's like a 25 to 30-year mission from inception to design. And then when it finally gets launched, it takes at least 10 years to get out there. And then you get another 10 years of science to go. Not going to happen, John. Sorry.
I think the first part's even more important, which is there'll probably be one magic mission where that will happen because they'll have designed it for the Falcon Heavy and then they'll realize they can put it on a Starship. But the second that they realize Starship is available, you're right. This thing is going to get really big and ungainly and start growing in weight massively.
Oh, yeah. It's just like, we'll have this huge pro and we'll have like a ton of landers and we'll throw some drones in there and, a few other things and some really wild kind of spectroscopy experiments they're going to come up with. And let's just sell like solar sailing at the same time. It's just, oh yeah, it's going to be everything but the kitchen sink.
Have you seen who is it who's looking at making a space telescope? But they're looking with the Starship about putting an Earth-based telescope basically inside of Starship and launching it into orbit. So, really, really big dish.
Right, with the idea that it doesn't fold, right. But as soon as they realize, wait a minute, how big could it be if we actually folded it up now?
Right.
So it's like that one time it goes up and then guarantee every other one up there is going to be folded.
Man, we're going to have these gigantic, it'll be like 40-meter like telescopes because they'll fold out these 9-meter panels or something. Yeah. It'll be crazy. So yeah, we'll have this little tiny golden sliver of time when people will actually still be building small satellites to put into Starship. And then once they realize that they can, because you can also, there is an advantage to this, by the way, and that is that it costs a huge amount of money and a huge amount of time to build these things so light and to scrap everything you don't need. So if you don't have to be quite so careful, you can build it a lot faster and you can build fully redundant systems. Like you can just have 2 of everything. It's like, one spectrometer. No, well, let's have 2. We'll have 2 fully redundant systems here. So that's why. What do we care? It doesn't cost us.
Maybe that's what it's going to be. Is that you'll have 2 identical satellites going up.
Oh yeah.
And instead of boosting them out, we're still going to do the flybys and everything else in case one of them doesn't make it.
Yeah, actually, that's true. And then they could just separate after they finally get into the right orbital trajectory.
Yeah. Now we have to talk about Psyche because we're psyched about Psyche, and
yes, we are.
It is pronounced Psyche. It's not Psych. I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Psyche. So the interesting thing everyone says is like how much rare earths and how much gold is on there and everything else, and everyone always kind of has a laugh. And I have to quote Dr. Phil Metzger, who had an interesting tweet. Kind of about that and the economics of asteroid mining and all these rare earths and really precious kind of metals that would come back.
Artist's conception of this, not real.
Right. And he said that it is estimated that there's like 1 trillion tons of sand on Earth, and that sand costs $5 per ton. So let's sell all the sand for $5 trillion. Okay. So he's just talking about the silly economics argument on all these things, and that we already have several examples here on Earth of how prices are kind of controlled and has nothing to do with actual supply. So gold on Earth right now is artificially high because there are lots and lots of gold reserves in Russia that have been mined. They're just basically sitting there and slowly coming out onto the market as they want. We also know about oil and OPEC, that the price of oil is easily controlled that way. And also like De Beers diamonds is like the same thing. They have control of that. They only release the diamonds to a certain level to be able to get what they want. So it's all about supply and demand.
Right.
And one of my economics professor's favorite movie was Goldfinger. So you remember the plot of Goldfinger was like he's breaking into Fort Knox, right? Because not only is all the American gold there, like most other countries also leave their gold reserves in there. And that gold reserve sits there and does absolutely nothing. It's just there. So like a country has one and they can trade with another one if they actually need to buy something with it. But it's not like it's ever used for anything. It's just like it's to stabilize currencies and everything. And Goldfinger's idea is like he's already bought a lot of gold. He wants to make his gold worth more. So what he wants to try to do is like destroy the gold supply. Now, you can't really destroy gold, but you could potentially, and a nuclear physicist will probably say, nah, it doesn't work that way. He was going to set off an atomic bomb inside of Fort Knox to irradiate all the gold. So now the gold is like of absolutely no value, and therefore the price of gold goes up. But then my economics professor said, well, the flaw in that argument is just make sure no one knows the gold has been irradiated and nothing happens to the price of gold. Okay. So now when it comes to Psyche, as soon as that stuff starts coming home, the price of all these precious metals is just going to drop like crazy. And so you might say, well, what's the economic value then if I can't have all these things? And the thing is, in my opinion, gold has almost no intrinsic value. And for the most part, people say, well, wait a minute, it makes really great jewelry. Yeah, so what? But I can't eat it. I can't do a lot of other things. Yes, there are some high-tech applications. Education, you'll see gold-plated leads and stuff like that. So it can be used somewhere in industry, but it's not like it really has that much purpose. There are other metals that, in my opinion, are far more valuable and far more useful than that. Now, a lot of these rare earths and everything else, they are really quite useful, which is part of the reason they're a bit expensive. And if you take something like, I think platinum, I mean, you can make fuel cells. One of the problems with fuel cells is that, the really good ones that are very efficient require platinum, which means they're just prohibitively cost expensive.
Well, and also let's not forget about catalytic converters for the
catalytic converters
engines. Yeah. So.
Right. So the thing is, it's the applications that these things would now be able to do, because now suddenly all these technologies are like, we really can't do it because we don't have an ample supply of cobalt, for example. It's just like, we're going to get the cobalt out of all our batteries because of it. And then, a lot of the rare earth magnets and everything else. Now those things can become cheaper. Then suddenly you are going to have a whole new set of technologies that are kicked off from it. So it's not because we're bringing back platinum, and platinum is like, the price is ridiculous compared to gold. It's might be 10 or 100. It's way up there. Now that price would come way down if you were actually able to find it much in Psyche, which of course is decades and decades away before that ever happens. But it is very useful, of course, right now for science to kind of find out, and retrieval from the asteroids. And the other thing is except for the rare earths, which might be useful on Earth, most of the stuff you're going to find out there is going to be of more value in space.
Right.
So we don't have to cart that stuff up.
Yeah. Because again, getting it off the planet is the hard part. So I wanted to bring this up because this is the original mission profile. And you can see that between August 2022 and January 2026. So 3.5 years it was originally supposed to take to get there, because Mars was in the right place. So they were going to be able to do a nice quick flyby. So it was going to launch a year ago, August 2022, get a kick from Mars, come around and get right to Psyche. But the problem is, because they missed that window, Mars isn't in the right place. And I believe they have to go around the sun. And I couldn't find the current one, but I believe it's Venus, not Earth, but it might be Earth. But anyway, it then needs to go around again. And so it's like we have several more trips around the sun because of the fact that they missed that window. But it's where all these planets and asteroids are lined up with each other. So really interesting how that just a software glitch caused them to extend the mission. Gosh, like it was supposed to be over by 4 years from now. And now it won't even be there by 6 years from now. So it's pretty crazy.
So it looks like it's using ion thrusters.
Yes. Oh yeah. I should share that again, because that's a really interesting fact. It's Hall thrusters this time. Yep. It's they're the first major use of Hall thrusters. So so this spot right here, after like the gray bar area,
never stop thrusting. Look at that, it just keeps going and going
here, and then that's here all the way out to Psyche. So the Hall effect thrusters are xenon, is that right? Is that
they're probably using xenon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they're using xenon, and what they do is they kick, because it's a noble gas, so it's very inert. They kick one of the electrons off and then accelerate it around in kind of a circle and then spit it out the back end. And it's got much more high, the particles coming out are very, very high speed, and xenon is very, very heavy. So you get a lot of thrust per one, but it's on the order of, it's not even a Newton, right? I mean, it's like a fraction of
Oh, it's micro. It's it's very small, but because you're able to do it over such a long period of time, it really starts to build up. So the thing is, with the ion drive, is the xenon is just a propellant. It's not a fuel. You don't need to bring oxidizer. Your energy source is the sun, because you're just using electricity. So what kind of limits the amount of thrust you can get from it is the amount of power you can produce.
Right. So you're never going to get off. You're never going to get off the planet Earth. You cannot take off.
Yes, you can't. You can't.
You're not going to overcome that gravitational force.
Right.
But once you're out there, the ISP is huge for these things, because it can go forever.
It's super long, and it's just a question of how big are your solar arrays, and what are the what other power requirements do you have? And of course, the problem is the further you get away from the sun, then suddenly the amount of energy you have available goes down. And I'm pretty sure they use xenon because that is the most efficient. There might be some others that are a little bit heavier, but they're just so rare. You're not going to find it. I think there's a couple other after it, and plus they're, I think, radioactive. So I was like, why would you want to? So xenon tends to be the sweet spot as far as cost and availability.
That very stable atom, because it's going to have to be in there for 6 years, just hanging around until finally it gets kicked out the back. So,
the other thing is that you just don't. Whenever something's radioactive, you have to handle it correctly and everything else. So the best thing is find something that's stable, pretty easy to get. SpaceX is not using xenon, even though they would prefer in their Hall effect thrusters for Starlink. They don't have their needs are just to be able to do slight maneuvers in Earth orbit. And they've gone down too. I remember they went down to Krypton because it was cheaper. And now they've gone down to argon. And part of the reason is availability, is they require so much of it. They would use up like the world's supply of Krypton gas or xenon to be available for something else. And a lot of the production of that is effectively kind of offline, because most of it comes out of Ukraine. But the thing about those gases is not that, and same with neon, I think, it's not that Ukraine is sitting on a mine of noble gases. It's just that they set up the industry to be able to do it. Anyone can do it in the world, just that they were able to do it at such a low price. No one else even bothered to do it. So if anyone wanted to ramp it up, it's I think it's available. I forget what some of the different sources are, but it's pretty much any country could do it if they felt like it.
Yeah, but of course, if somebody said, let's do it, it's not tomorrow you turn that on, it's years.
Right. Exactly. So if there seems to be like a big demand, then suddenly you would see that change. The difference
between this NASA mission, NASA's carry, this is high performance one-off, doesn't really matter how much the xenon costs. For Starlink, we're talking about thousands and thousands of these things.
There's already over 4,000 in orbit. That doesn't include how many they've already put up there. I think close to 500 have already come down. So they're just over 4,000 that are actually operating in orbit.
Yeah. So I mean,
the plan is to build it out to 40,000.
Yeah. they need a cheap, they need something cheap and readily available. They can't.
And of those 40,000, remember, we're not talking about the V1s. We're not even talking about like what I think they're the V2 minis. We're talking about the big boys they plan on putting up with Starship. So those are going to be much bigger, which means they're going to need a little bit more propellant themselves to be able to orbit. So it's like, yikes, that is going to be a lot. So there's pretty high demand for that. And argon is like a byproduct. Some people almost consider it like a waste product.
Where's it come from? Is it?
It just comes from liquefaction of air. So actually, I mean, that's basically what the Ukrainians are. That's right. The source is basically air. It's like all the noble gases are there, but there's such small amounts. The more you liquefy it, you get it. So people that want to get liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen, which are needed for things like, and the way they're doing it, it's like, it's like this argon gas is getting mixed in the way. We got to get rid of that stuff. So it's there. And argon is very useful in welding as a shielding gas and a lot of other things. So it's like, it's cheap. They almost give it away for free. And then as you start to go down there, you will find some krypton in there, and you'll find some xenon. They're just there in the Earth's atmosphere because they're heavy. So they're going to be down kind of low. they're the trace gases, the other that you always end up seeing.
Yeah.
And because they're noble, they don't combine with anything. So
Right.
if you had like other, gases that were out there that tend to combine with something, they just would, and then you wouldn't see it in the Earth's atmosphere anymore. And they're not radioactive, so they hang around.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, using the whole periodic table.
Yeah. And I think part of the
They're
reason
the ones
they
on the
get
right,
it,
folks. They're the ones on the right.
I think part of the reason they get it in Ukraine is it has something to do with like some industrial process where they need like liquid nitrogen or other things that might be, I think it's something to do with steelworks.
Okay.
That they kind of need it. And then it's like, hey, guess what? We get this other byproduct. We just do a little bit more liquefaction, separation of that, and then we can sell it in the open markets and make even a little bit more money.
Right. So yep. You get, so that's good for them. But anyway, I mean, you can definitely tell that SpaceX's needs and Starlink needs in particular are very, very different than the Psyche mission. Psyche is all about getting every single ounce of or Newton of thrust that you can get out of this stuff. So whatever you can do, that's the best quality for that. It's a one-off.
And no drag to worry about. No drag. Absolutely no drag.
Elon talks about that all
you
the
got
time.
6 years to just keep on thrusting.
Yeah. There goes. So yeah, it is still disappointing though, because it would have already done the flyby back in May, and it would be well on its way to Psyche by now if it had launched at the right time. So it's a bummer.
But it's going to have to be quite the soft toss when it finally gets out there, so that whatever timing they're doing, they can't come in too hot.
Right.
Because I don't know if they've got any other thrusters. I wonder if they have some other thrusters besides the Hall effect thrusters in order to get into the orbit. Or whether it's one of those things that, again, it's just like, just floating so gently, it just easily kind of grabbed. They're going to have to do a little bit, or they might do a couple of flybys and slowly, keep on doing it
than likely that's
to get into a braking orbit.
Right. So, I think you can see what the plan is on that profile is. They're going to do the same thing as the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, which is they're going to come up underneath it and catch it from behind. So as they're, because of course the smaller orbit,
which would make more sense. Yep.
So they'll keep raising their orbit until they finally match it, and they'll be going just about exactly the same speed.
Okay, at that point, you're no longer throwing. It's more of a handoff at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Just make sure you don't fumble it.
Right. Yeah. It's not even a pass anymore. It's give me the ball.
The flea flicker.
Yeah. So, but I don't know how fast Psyche is orbiting, but it's moving around pretty fast, even out there past the orbit of Mars, so it's you talk about these things and you're like, it's really slow. It's like relatively to each other slow, but they're motoring through the solar system. So you got to get it just right, or you get a big explosion instead. Just whack, smack the two of them together. All right, so we have gone through Falcon Heavy, Falcon launch profiles, xenon and argon thrusters. What else do you want to talk about? Is that good?
And we did rants too. So
we did rants, right? We don't
have to revisit that. No.
Okay. I think we've covered enough for one day. So thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate it. This is very edifying. I hope people find this valuable. Again, if you want this shirt, don't forget 2 weeks to orbit, because maybe someday we'll actually get to see Starship again.
Well, remember, a broken clock is right twice a day. So one of those days you put that on there, it's going to be right. It'll be 2 weeks.
Exactly. So in the meantime, we will wait for the Cybertruck delivery event, which will be 2 weeks, but actually I heard it's going to be a little longer than that. But anyway, so hopefully it will be 2 weeks sometime soon.
But yeah, my guess on that is that people were saying there should be like the 3 week notice or something like that. Just because it's Texas courtesy, not that they're going to do a 3 week notice.
Right.
So all the rumors about the 26th, I think we can put those to bed, because it's not even 2 weeks. So it's like, that's not going to happen. You got to give people at least 2 weeks. I mean, 1 week, come on. And there's probably people coming from overseas that want to do it. That's really tough to do it. So it's gotta be at least, so the only thing is like, is it the 4th anniversary of the Cybertruck, which is that's the 21st, but that's Thanksgiving weekend.
21st, and that's 2 days before Thanksgiving. So
it's not going to happen then. And then the only other thing is like, do you blot out like Thursdays or something like that? That's also a gamble, because most of the events have, I think, happened on a Thursday in the past, except like the last shareholder meeting was on a Tuesday. So I was like, okay, days with teas. That's about all we can do. So as far as advanced planning, no idea of when it's going to be. Cross your fingers that it's November and doesn't get pushed to December or something like that.
Yeah,
And
I don't think October is a possibility anymore. I think November is realistic, but it could get pushed to December. You never.
yeah, I mean, the only thing is that December gets kind of crazy because also the holidays, people really don't like traveling. Weather starts getting iffy. I would hope they would try to do it before Thanksgiving. That's when most people would be amenable to it. But
Right. Plus the fact it would be just nice to see a few of them in real customer hands, not employees' hands, before December 31st. And with the whole Christmas, holiday, New Year thing at the end of December, that means really it has to happen before you have to deliver before the 21st. So it would be ideal if they could do the launch event before December so that they would have a few weeks to put some, vehicles.
well, we don't even know the pricing on these things, do we?
No,
So
no,
we don't
it's
even know if
crazy.
it's going to be available for the tax credit.
We don't know how big these things are going to be. Like, we still don't have measurements. It's crazy.
So if it's available for the tax credits, then they wait till January to do that for.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the people I think that are getting the first ones, they probably don't qualify anyway.
Right.
So
they probably don't care either. They're probably like,
yeah,
just give it to me. I'll make so much money off of having an early version that the cost doesn't matter.
Well, wait a minute. As far as the electric vehicle tax credits, it's specified as a pickup. So does that fall in?
Isn't that
85? Do you know what the cap is for the pickup?
I thought it was just 85. I thought that was SUVs and bigger.
Oh, SUV 85. So if it's under 85, then yeah, that would be nice. But again, the orders are so crazy that they could charge anything they want and not have to worry about the tax credit.
I think, if we want to go out on a limb, I think they'll have the base two motor version will be less than 85,000, maybe 79.9 or something. But that the plaid one that they will deliver first will be
the tri-motor
100 and won't be eligible for that. I would be pleasantly surprised if that's not true, but given the fact that the X plaid is not like available, it's 90 something, right around 90. It's going to be as much as that. And so I just don't think it's going to be eligible. And again, like you said, I think those people getting the early ones are just not going to care. They're going to be like, give me this thing. I don't care. If somebody said they give me one of the early ones, I mean, sell me, I would still buy it because I know that my channel would end up making up the money for it. $7,500 I'd make back just driving it around and showing it off.
And you qualify, actually. Yes, you do qualify.
Exactly. So anyway, we'll see, but thank you so much again. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to talk, and I hope people enjoy this. And if folks have comments, like questions that they still want answered, definitely let us know. And in the meantime, do all the liking and subscribing and all that other good stuff. Follow Scott on Twitter, on X. Follow Scott on X.
My rant will be fully posted on X.
There we go.
Then John will probably get the full clip of my rant. You only see a little bit at the beginning of this video out there. It was a first time reading, and we almost have to redo the reading, John, because I got it all wrong.
A big thanks to Scott once again for joining us today. Be sure to follow him on X. And if you're interested in these amazing MOVA globes, be sure to go to movaglobes.com and use my code DKIT10 to get 10% off your order. In the meantime, we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye now.